Do you need planning permission for horse stables? In this video we're going to split it up into three sections. Firstly, we're going to look at mobile stables and shelters. Secondly, we're going to look at built stables like this. And thirdly, we're going to look at whether you need planning permission to change the use of an agricultural building into an American style barn. And please remember, when we're giving you this advice, this relates to personal use and not business use. So the first thing we're going to cover is mobile shelters and stables. Unfortunately, this is actually the hardest one to advise on because there are so many different types. Whether you require planning permission for a mobile shelter or stable actually depends on a number of things. It depends on the materials, it depends on how big it is, it depends on whether or not you leave it in the same location, and its degree of permanence. So if you were to take one end of the spectrum where you've got just a single, very lightweight timber shelter, which actually is pick-upable and movable, and you do move it around the paddocks, that probably is considered something called a chattel, which doesn't constitute development, and we don't actually need planning permission for that. At the other end of the range, you've got much more sort of heavyweight timber buildings. If they're sort of bolted to the concrete or they stay where they are, perhaps like 2 or 3 of them, then that probably, even if they're technically capable of being moved, if they're not moved and they're a little bit heavier and a little bit bigger, then they probably do need planning permission. So you've got 2 ends of the spectrum, and if you've got something in between, you've just kind of got to decide which end you're at as to whether you do or don't need planning permission. If you're in any doubt, send us some photos over. We can have a quick look on the computer for you and give you some advice. So the second one we're going to cover are built stables, be it timber or blockwork built stables. So this is a very typical type of stable that you'll see. Now, whether the stable is either built off-site and brought in, bolted to the ground, or whether it is something that is built on-site, generally speaking, something of this kind of size, degree of permanence, this will always require planning permission. The only odd occasion where you might not need planning for a couple of stables is if they are built in the curtilage of your garden, and even then it still depends on how big they are. So the third one to cover is when you change the use of an agricultural building to an equestrian building, something like an American barn style set of stables. So at one end, if you were just putting one small stable in for the kids' pony and you're on a farm, then that probably isn't a material change of use. If it's just one stable, the rest of the shed is still agricultural, it's probably sort of de minimis, and it's not, you haven't materially changed the use of that barn, it's still agricultural. So that's something you probably wouldn't necessarily seek consent for. If at the other end you're looking at doing a whole change where you're putting and fitting out stables in the whole of the barn, that will definitely be changing the use from an agricultural use to an equestrian use, and so in that scenario you will need planning permission.